Okay. Um, Good morning, everybody. I will share my screen and pull up my slides and all that good stuff. And surprisingly bad at talking and doing Zoom things at the same time, even all these years later. Okay. All right. So my session in the Systems Librarianship 101 is going to be on communication tips. And I know from a lot of your names, you've been around the systems community and world for a while. So I welcome you to add on at any point if there's anything you'd like to add or expand on. I'm going to have opportunities for us to have discussion as part of this as well, and so that will perhaps help the future recording watchers. Like I said, I'm Michele DeSilva. I work at Central Oregon Community College in Bend, Oregon. I am our systems and discovery librarian, and I've worked in libraries since 1999. And I did take a brief break from libraries and worked in a traditional IT department as a systems analyst. So I've had that experience as well. Um, and so today we're just going to look at the communication landscape for systems librarians and talk about some skills that people can use to improve or refine communication. We know that's always an ongoing skill. You never just, arrive at the point where you're like, I am a perfect communicator and I know it all. We're always working on that. So hopefully, even though I know many of you are very, very experienced and probably experts in this as well, hopefully you'll still find something that you can take away from this. So we will talk about some of our key audiences that systems librarians communicate with, identify common communication tasks for systems librarians, talk about some of those skills, both the soft ones and the hard ones that we need, and how we might develop them, which I think is always a less clear path than developing some other skills. Like, right, if we want to learn how to code or learn how to work a particular system, it's pretty easy to find like, here is a path to proficiency in this hard skill, and communication is way different in that regard. And then we'll also talk about some actionable tips for different scenarios. And I have put links to my slides in the agenda. So there's a couple of links in here that you may want to look at later or pass on to other folks. So you can get those through the slides. So I have talked in the last year or so with several people who are interested in becoming systems librarians. And one question I always ask them is I say, why does this, why are you interested in, being a systems librarian? And a lot of people have this impression that it's this nice, quiet job where they, sit in an office or a cubicle by themselves and they just work on systems and they're not bothered by, the public or contacts with anyone else. And, we all have our days probably where we get to do that. But by and large, I find that that is not the case. And it's more like the illustration you see here, which shows somebody working at their desk and they have, all these things going on at the same time. They're on the phone, they're in front of their email, they're texting, they have meetings, they have deadlines. And it's really a lot more communication and interactivity than people sometimes think. Of course, you all know that because you do this work, but I find that's a common misconception, similar to the general misconceptions people have about librarianship in general, where when you tell somebody you're a librarian and they go, oh, I wish I got to sit around and read all day. And I say, yes, me too. But that's not what it's like. And one thing I think as a systems librarian, you end up sort of as the hub with a network. You're not really the center. I always think library users are always the center of everything we do. But for the purposes of this slide, as a systems librarian, you're at the center of this hub of different audiences that you communicate with. So, like I said, library users first and foremost in our particular library world. And I do have a lot of direct contact with users, partially because we're a small library and I also do instruction and reference and all those things. But even that aside, I have a lot of contact with users. And then, of course, I spend time, talking to vendors, uh, putting in tickets, doing demos and things like that to learn about new products and doing configuration. So I talk with vendors a lot. And of course, I talk to my colleagues in the library a lot, a lot, a lot. I spend a lot of time with every department in my library. And then, of course, in my college as a whole, we have our other faculty and staff colleagues that we work with who aren't in the library, but who have, differing levels of understanding and interest in what we do in the library. And so there's always that, navigating different people's understandings and perceptions and knowledge. And I work with IT a lot. I know a lot of larger libraries have an IT department within the library. We do not. We work with our college's IT department, and that includes, our network and our infrastructure people, programmers, project managers, our cybersecurity team, and then our support and help desk folks. So a lot of different audiences just within the IT department that I work with. We also work with our institutional research department, and I know every institution calls this something different, but those are for us the people who do all of our internal data gathering and research for things like the IPED statistics and a lot of other more complex things, but we do a lot of data work with them. And then of course, we work with administrators. We are going through budget season right now, so we've just put together our budget request, and we talk with our the vice president that we report to. We talk with her quite a bit. So I have all these different audiences that I have to talk to, and I can't use just one communication style or one communication strategy to address them all, or even within, each audience, there's little subsets. So I just wanted to point that out. And that is one part of, the multifaceted, multi-channeled communications process for systems librarians. And then, as you might expect, given that, there's also a variety of communication tasks. And so I thought it'd be helpful to just talk about some examples of the kinds of communication we do as systems librarians. So of course, we support end users, and that's everything from the student on their first day of school at our college who needs help getting an ebook that is going to be used in their class to, faculty who've been around for 30 years and who are kind of like power users. So a wide variety of technical skills and interest in what they're trying to do and why they're trying to achieve it. We also do a lot of translating user needs into technical requirements. So if you are implementing a new system, or if you have departments that are maybe redoing their processes and procedures, and then you have to make the system work for those maybe revised processes and procedures. You spend a lot of time talking to the users and then saying, okay, well, we can do this in Alma. We can't do this in Alma. We can do this in this other system, those types of things. And then, of course, there's a lot of liaising between vendors, the library, IT, and our users, depending on the situation. Whenever we get a new e-resource, there's always the setup that goes into that. And since our IT department is outside of the library, I'm usually somewhere between the vendor and our IT department to do things to set up like single sign-on authentication, and make sure that things get set up properly and tested, and that we don't run into any roadblocks there. Also, when talking to different audiences, I may need to describe library-specific, technical operations, procedures, and needs to non-library audiences. So when I'm making those budget requests to our administrators, I have to put it into like words that are clear to like non-library experts. Also, this comes up at like family gatherings and people are like, what do you do? And I tell them and they're like, okay, but what do you do? And then I have to, explain it in some way that's reasonable to people who aren't super familiar with the inner workings of library systems. And then on the flip side, I'm translating technical language into library relatable language for my coworkers. within the library. So if there's, confusing vendor documentation or something like that. Another example, of course, with all the digital accessibility stuff that we're working on, there's a lot of explaining what the technical requirements are and the WCAG 2.1 guidelines are in like plain language and with examples so that people can relate it to what they do. I also, and probably a lot of people in their systems duties have some kind of use metrics, data analysis type of role. So I do a lot of reporting on that. And then we incorporate user feedback into our websites or digital projects, our system configurations. So you learn how to take, formal and informal feedback and turn it into something actionable. The least favorite part of communication in the systems librarian world, in my opinion, is sometimes having to be the bearer of bad news. So there are times when things go wrong with systems go down, things aren't configured right, access isn't working off campus, things like that. And, I have to be the person to say like, oh, this is broken, or this got lost, or, something like that. And then there's also just the regular bad news of you were hoping you could do this with the system, but it turns out that's not how it's designed to work. And so that is, probably the least fun communication that systems librarians do. And then there's also just the training and instructing that we do, again, formal and informal, for our colleagues and our users. Can anybody, did anybody think of any other either audiences that we talk to or common communication tasks that you'd like to throw into the mix? Not required to, but if you're like, oh, you totally forgot, these people that I know we talk to all the time. All right, well, some of the skills that um, are involved in communicating as a systems librarian. Obviously, as you might be thinking now, from the the wide range of types of people we talk to and the wide range of communication tasks we have, it also takes a wide range of overlapping skills to accomplish those types of communications to all those different audiences. It takes a lot of soft skills. And when I was putting this together, I was like, oh, I actually have to think about like what, discrete skills I would call what I use when I'm approaching a communication situation. The easiest one to think of, and what I might think is the most important one, is just empathy. So, people come to us for help at a lot of different times. People have a lot of different ranges of understanding of academic libraries, of library systems, of libraries in general. And so just understanding, meeting people where they're at and what their urgency level is, what the level of importance that they ascribe to the task they're doing. And then, of course, we get people who are frustrated or upset because they have a deadline and something's not working or they can't find what they need. And that can be, external people, but it can also be our coworkers, like if Alma goes down or if something's not working the way they think it should in Alma. And then we do a lot of supporting people through change. So, obviously if we are doing like a systems migration, that's a really big noticeable change. And people react differently to that regardless of, if we think it's a big deal or not, or if we're just focused on the technical aspects of it. There's like an emotional side to it and a psychological side to it that we have to think about too. So just having that empathy for people is really important. There's also a ton of navigating these gray areas of leadership and conflict resolution. So and when you're in a systems role, when you're in a technical role, you're often managing a project, implementing some kind of software or something where you need multiple people to play together, but very rarely do you manage any of those people, and you may not manage any people at all. So it can get really a lot of gray areas when you're managing, asking people to do things and you have like no real authority to make them do those things. And then you also have to navigate competing needs and requirements. So frequently when you're configuring a system, there you have to make some choices, and the choices you make may be more beneficial to one group than another group, or to some users than other users. And you have to, weigh your options and make an informed decision. But that can be really, it can be really hard to do. And sometimes it's even hard to name that you're doing that. And especially if it seems like just like a technical issue and you're not really thinking about, or if you're either not thinking about or just intuitively doing, the weighing the options kind of thing. You also have to be really flexible. You're going to talk to a lot of different people in a lot of different scenarios. And so you have to figure out how to choose that right style and strategy for the particular audience you're talking to. I would also think it's really important to build trust, which is a super squishy thing to do. But I think one way you can do that is with follow through. So, if you tell somebody you're going to fix a problem or look into something, do it and follow up with them. And then don't overpromise. When people ask us to do as librarians, it's, people say, oh, I need this or I need that. And I feel like our sort of professional instincts are to say, I can do that. I can make that happen. And then sometimes you can't, just depending on the system, limitations. And so it's always, and I've really worked on this in recent years of being like, I see what you need. I understand it. Let me see if I can do that and I'll get back to you. Instead of being like, yeah, I can make that happen. And then having to, come back with the bad news. Curiosity is also really great. You obviously, you need to be open to learning about different functional areas in your library. You may find yourself working with a group where you know nothing about, their day-to-day processes, and so you have to be willing to sit down and learn about those things. And then, of course, technology, always changing, always new things, and you have to have some degree of willingness to learn about those new trends and solutions without being always, without being blinded by the magic or the hype of it. But you do have to be, have a willingness to learn about those things. Oh, and I see Margaret put in the chat that she thought of one more group that wasn't in my list of audiences, and it's non-local professional colleagues. So like email list and conferences. That's a great one. Yeah. And of course, that's as we sit here talking in a group of a group of non-institutionally affiliated colleagues. That is a really good one. Thanks, Margaret. So those are some of the soft skills that I think are important and helpful. Of course, we could probably think of other ones, but I think these are, a few to really focus on as you're building your skills. And so then there's also hard skills. And like I say here, with some soft edges, because usually the hard skills are complemented by the soft skills. So obviously, we need technical knowledge, and none of us have all the technical knowledge we need. Especially if you are an audience for a systems librarian 101 type training, you might be new to systems librarianship. And so you're going to be maybe at the beginning of your journey of technical knowledge. But even when you're well into a career, because things are changing and systems change and technologies change, you're continuously building that technical knowledge. You also need some troubleshooting skills. And this relates to communication, because it helps to be able to figure out what the problem is so that you can communicate about it effectively. And it's sort of like the last point on this slide of asking the right questions. And but you need some kind of process to figure out when you get the email from a coworker and it says Alma is broken. Okay, how is it broken? Would be a good place to start. Or, what problem did you observe? So you need some kind of troubleshooting skills to work through some of the communication challenges. And I think troubleshooting seems kind of nebulous, and maybe a thing you learn intuitively. And you certainly do get better at it with practice and stuff, but um, there are some specific methodologies out there around troubleshooting. One is there's an organization called CompTIA, and they do IT certification. So it's not library specific, but one thing I learned when I worked in traditional IT was that they are really big on certifications for skills. So if there is a skill that applies to IT, there's likely a certification for it. And this CompTIA has a troubleshooting certification path. But they have this nice little blog post that I link to here where they outline some of the steps of troubleshooting. So if it's something where you're like, I don't really know how to troubleshoot or like how to codify that, there are resources out there to help you develop that as a hard skill. Of course, you need writing skills, no matter what no matter what kind of systems librarian role you end up in, you're going to do some kind of writing, whether it's documentation or submitting tickets to a vendor, um, or just writing emails to your coworkers, things like that. Training, presentation, public speaking skills, those all help too. Even if you never stand up in front of a room and offer something that you formally call a training session, learning some of the skills there can help you even when you're working with people one-on-one. I did a lot of instruction training early on in my librarian career, and I use that so much when I'm just working with people one-on-one around technical issues. Listening actively, also super important. I know some people consider listening a soft skill, and I think there is certainly an element of soft skill to it. And you need the soft skills like empathy and things like that to be a really great listener. But I also think there are ways that you can take concrete steps to improve your listening. So you can develop it like a hard skill, especially if it's something that you might know you have a weakness at with. There are some concrete things you can do to develop it. And then I already mentioned this one, but asking the right questions, sort of related to troubleshooting, but it's not always a troubleshooting. It doesn't always come up in the context of, problems and troubleshooting. And I don't know how many of you were trained in the reference interview when you were either in library school or in a job, but it's really, really similar to the reference interview. Um, is how many people, like, let's do a show of hands in Zoom. How many people are familiar with the reference interview? All right. So quite a few people. Cool. Um, and the reference interview, for those who aren't familiar with it, is just a way to, it's a way to understand what somebody is really asking you. So I think like the classic example, at least the one I was taught with, and that is stuck in my brain from my first training on this was somebody walks up to the reference desk and they say, I want a book on China. And you take them to this section of books about the country China, and it turns out they were looking for information about like the dishes, like China. So it's a way of navigating ambiguous questions, and then also figuring out what people really want. Because I think if you've ever been in any situation where you're either in the position to be asked technical questions or reference questions, you have probably figured out that people don't always ask for what they really want. They sometimes come at their question in a roundabout way. And so the reference interview is a way to clarify and get to what they really want or need. And especially with technical questions, people may not have the vocabulary to ask the question they really want to ask. It kind of goes back to that statement we get sometimes of Alma is broken. And for the user, that might be the best they can do to say that like Alma is not working the way it normally does for me. And then we have to talk with them more to find out what that means. But it just depends on the situation. And I just wanted to point out that these things take time and practice, as you all know. So if you think back to when you started your systems librarian work, um, you probably have gotten so much better at all these things over time. And again, a lot of it is intuitive learning through experience, or maybe you see coworkers doing things that work well and you mirror them, or maybe you see coworkers doing things poorly and you do not mirror them. So over time, we learn these things, but it does take that time and practice. And I've got a image of a drummer here because I think it's a lot like music. Like you don't just wake up one day and unless you're like a prodigy, but like most of us aren't. And you don't just wake up one day and you're like, I'm an excellent musician. You start with basic skills and you practice those over time and you gradually work your way up to more complex and interesting things. Um, so I think it's important to point that out, especially for people who are somewhat new to this, just to know that like if you're floundering at first, it's okay. Like that will happen and you will make mistakes and other people will make mistakes, and give yourself some grace around that and give other people grace around that, and then just try to get better over time. You know, pay attention to what works well, pay attention to what doesn't work well, and learn either way. That having been said, for the time in practice, I think there are a few things um, that are really more precise and actionable in the short term than, while you're working on developing these soft and hard skills um, that you can, put into place right away that will help. Um, so avoiding acronyms is always a good idea. And of course, know your audience. If you're talking to a bunch of people and you know really what their experience is, and you know that you all have, similar knowledge and skill sets, then go ahead, use those acronyms that you all know. But if you're talking to users, or if you're talking to faculty outside of the library and they may not know the acronym for, like if you say like MARC record to like a random science faculty, are they going to have any idea what you're talking about? That's also kind of the jargon thing, but point being, limit your acronyms and your jargon. And with being kind of in between the library worlds and the tech worlds, you have to think about it both ways. So if I'm talking with my IT folks, I'm going to try to avoid library jargon. And then if I'm talking with my library colleagues about technical issues, I'm going to try to avoid, super specific tech jargon that they may not know. The other day in a meeting, just a few weeks ago, always learning. I used the word deprecated to refer to some system. I forget what now, but I said, oh yeah, that's being deprecated. And a couple of my colleagues, gave me a funny look and they were like, what does that mean? And then I was like, oh, it gets expired, out of date. And I don't, and that's one of the things of like, my blinders, like I don't think of deprecated as a particularly jargony word, but it's maybe not used as much outside of tech circles. Um, and I think there's this article from just recently from 2024. For years there was I don't know, it was famous to me. Um, the famous list of terms library users don't understand. And a couple of librarians at, I think, the University of Colorado in Boulder did a literature review and updated that list. And it's the article is linked here, and they provided an updated list of terms that users don't understand. And it's pretty funny if you look at it. Kind of the takeaway is that users don't understand most of the words that we use. And even as I was reading the list, I was like, yeah, like 10 of these words are like on our library's homepage. So I should probably do something about that. But it's just good to be aware of words that we use all the time in our libraries, in our professional groups, that when we use them outside of the library, they don't mean that much to our audiences. Ask questions when you need more clarity or understanding. I know this sounds like super basic, but there are a lot of times where I know people don't ask questions, and then later on it comes up and they're like, well, I didn't really understand that, or, I didn't know what they meant by this. And it's like, it's okay to ask, like, it just, ask in a nice way. And it can really help if somebody's talking about something and you don't understand it, to ask them for an example or to give some kind of specifics to help clarify the situation. So, and this can go both ways, like all the time, like if vendors are giving a demo and they are saying something that's not clear, you can ask them to explain or demonstrate. But it also goes to like if users are explaining something or asking you a question, and you may need to ask clarifying questions. You probably are gathering I ask a lot of questions from from my content in this presentation. And I love examples. Examples are really great for helping figure out exactly what people are talking about, are exactly what part of a system you're looking at, are exactly how people want their workflow to work. And also, like, just think about, like, don't be defensive when people ask you questions or report problems. Um, it never fails that whenever we implement anything, and then I, share it with my coworkers in a staff meeting, there's always somebody who doesn't like, how the end product turns out. And people are often not shy about saying, like, I don't like that in some form or fashion. And so you just have to learn how to and it's like respectful, like people aren't being mean to me, but like still, like, you can feel like I worked on this implementation for 6 months or whatever, and then like the day I unveil it, people are already telling me how they hate it. But just it's another one of those like perspective things, like think about where they're coming from. It's not personal. Like I don't personally identify with Alma or Primo and peg my self-worth to how our library systems work. And people generally have good intentions. Like a lot of times when people say, oh, I don't like that, they follow it up with some kind of pretty logical reason of like, I think that'll be confusing to users, or something that makes sense. And so just kind of take it as feedback, but um, try not to be defensive about it. And because that will eventually shut people down from telling you things if they think, if they perceive that you're taking it the wrong way or harshly. And then I've already mentioned examples a couple of times, but just whenever you can, give people examples, especially in documentation or in tickets. It can really help speed up um, the the learning process or the problem solving process. Do we have any questions or any comments or anything before I go on? Okay. So let's do a quick practice. Oh, and then Margaret was typing and said, asking what the underlying issue is can be helpful when someone asks you for a solution. Yeah, I like that. And so I think the way I'm reading that is if somebody reports a problem or ask for, like Margaret says, a solution, then trying to figure out what's behind that is helpful. Yeah.
Sometimes people preconceive a solution without fully understanding what's possible, um, or what isn't possible. So it's helpful to know where they're starting from.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Thanks, Margaret. That's a yeah. Um, so we're gonna do a little practice. You can do this by yourself and not share. But if you don't mind, you can also share in the chat if you feel so inclined, or if you want to, um, get on the mic and share, that's fine too. We'll just take a couple of minutes, but just think about all these, all the things, your audience, jargon, perspectives. And so imagine that it's fall term and you are at your institution's student resource fair. We have one of these every fall, and you have ended up taking a shift at the table that may or may not be realistic in your library, but pretend it is. And you're talking to a first year undergraduate student, and you're trying to get them to you want them to use library resources, so you're trying to tell them about Primo VE. And how would you explain Primo VE to a first year undergraduate student in a minute or less, because you don't have much of their time, without using library jargon? And jargon would include the words database, discovery, metadata, and catalog. Just to, to name some words that are jargon. So think about that, and we'll do like 2 minutes. You can share if you want. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But think about how you would do that. Okay. I see Margaret has shared in the chat. Anybody, if anybody else wants to share in the chat, or does anybody want to verbally share well, verbal is writing too, but orally share share what you thought up? I like what Margaret put in the chat. Says, so when you need to find information for a paper, we have an online way to look up information that includes many sources, many sources, not just many sources you cannot find on the open web, and that are specifically academically oriented rather than like at the public library. And there's a lot of good things going on here. One, it's tying it to a need that the student's going to have, right? Even if they don't need to find information for a paper right this second, they're going to need to at some point. So that might stick in their brains. And then it also ties, and it same way it ties it to that academically oriented. So it's getting that in their brains. And then an online way to look up information, no jargon there, so that's pretty clear. what else did folks come up with, if you want to share? All right. I think maybe nobody else wants to share, but my option was so I debated whether or not this would be too jargony or not, but I just said it's a search engine for finding academic resources that you can access for free. And then I was like, do people know what a search engine is anymore? And I'm not sure that's all that common anymore. So I might just steal Margaret's way of saying it, an online way to look up academic information that you can get for free. Um, that might be what I go with. And of course, if you were really doing this scenario in real life, you'd probably think up of something ahead of time and have it planned out. Whether you want to share what you came up with or not, how many of you, like, show of hands, how many of you thought this was like a little difficult? Right. So, Camila, that's I like what it's too simple, but I mean, it is, but it's also like you just need to get it in people's heads. So Camilla said it's kind of like a free Amazon, but mostly for stuff to help you succeed in school, like books, videos, and articles. And most people are going to know what Amazon is. So it can be really helpful to bring in an analogy to a product that people are more familiar with. Um, it hurts my soul a little bit to always be like bringing up like proprietary corporation products, but it's what people know. Whenever we're talking about our streaming films, we say it's like Netflix, but for school. So that can be a super effective method as well. All right. Um, for people who yeah, or like Wikipedia, but more fact checked. Yeah. So for people who really respond to structured learning, because I know um, especially people, when we work with more technical topics and things like that, um, many of us respond well to that. And if you are the type of person where you're like, oh, all this like intuitive learning and like, time and practice, that sounds awful to me. That's fair. That's a thing that some people just want, like give me the process, teach me how to do this. And there are ways to get some of this as structured learning too. Over the years, I have found like technical writing, business communication, public speaking, or presenting courses, and change management courses have been really helpful in informing my communication strategies and style. I work occasionally with the faculty at our institution that teach business communication, and I am I when I first started working with them, I didn't really know, like, I guess I just assumed a business communication class was like writing memos, which makes no sense because nobody writes memos anymore. But when I actually got to see their content and the assignments they were working on, I was like, everybody should take this. This would be such a helpful course. And they talk a lot about like interpersonal communication and communication styles and active listening and all these things that are really just generally very helpful. Um, there is also, like I said, the IT world loves a certification. So there's a thing called um, IDLE, IDLE. I forget. I think I remember people saying it as IDLE. So it's the Information Technology Infrastructure Library, and that's what the acronym stands for. And they have a course called Foundation. And IDLE is a system that grew out of the UK government IT management theories of the 1980s, but it has since been developed and become like a proprietary certificate you can get. The specific certification they offer is in IT service management, and it is very not library specific. But sometimes if you look up like the study guides for the exam or the certificate, there's interesting things there that we can certainly apply to the library space. And since we all have access to eBook Central, ProQuest eBook Central through the Alliance, there is a somewhat recent study guide available through that, and there's chapter 4 and that has communication specific info and methodologies and things. A lot of our libraries probably subscribe to various products, and I also know like our public library offers some professional development products. So there's LinkedIn Learning, Gale courses. Those are the two I've seen through libraries the most. And all these professional development platforms have, kind of low stakes, shorter term classes on these topics. I work at a community college, and our community college offers professional development training for our small business community and for our public sector community. And they offer classes, in-person classes on these topics, and they're often, just a couple of nights or, just a couple of weekends or something like that. So you're not putting in like a whole college term on these things. And Margaret says project management in general as well. And that is also a good thing to have some knowledge in. And it is also one of those things where it covers some of these communication and change management and associated things. And then, of course, if you're at library conferences or professional organizations, you can also find webinars and professional development on these topics. So I had a couple of practice scenarios for us, but I know we are getting close to time. And I want to give a chance for questions, and any other comments you might have. And then we might have time to do just one quick scenario, but any questions or anything before maybe one quick scenario. Okay. All right, so let's do one quick scenario. So a faculty member has been using a library ebook for her course textbook. She sends you a panicked email during the third week of the term that the ebook link in Primo is no longer working. Meanwhile, circulation desk staff call to tell you that students in the class are reporting the same problem. And this is like library true crime. This is based on a true story. So if we think about this scenario, and I would love it if you drop answers in the chat or if you just want to talk, but same as before, you don't have to. So in this situation, whom do you need to communicate with? Who are your various, the various contacts that you need to communicate with in this situation? I can think of 3 for sure. So one would be the faculty, right? Which, yeah. And Angie, am I saying your name right? I hope so. So obviously the faculty that emailed you, you're going to be communicating with them. And then, yeah, you're going to talk to somebody in your library that is responsible for orders or cataloging metadata to find out if you still own the book. And then I guess along those same lines, I was thinking maybe also the vendor. So that would depend on, what your relationship is to the process. So in our library, I'm also our e-resources person, at least for the technical side of it. Our collection development librarian buys things, and then I'm the technical side. So I'm sort of, I'm that person that would reach out to the vendor and say like, what's up with this book? And I'd also look at it in Alma. And then the other group that we need to talk to is our library staff colleagues. So we know that we have students reporting the problem. So we need to reach out to staff and say like, hey, this is an issue. We know about it. We're looking at it. And libraries have different ways of doing that. So you might have like a known issues kind of tracking page or system, or you might just send out like, an email to the relevant people who might get public contact. And then, yeah, you could make a note on the record viewable in Primo. That would be a great way to communicate with people who are coming to that record and running into that problem. And so there's a technical aspect to this problem, but there's also some like emotional and affective aspects, because people are needing this item for an assignment. So they're probably urgent. They probably have like a sense of urgency around, I need this item now. I've got to do my homework. And then, of course, the faculty is probably, feeling very nervous because they have planned this entire course using this textbook, and they've told their students that they can get it for free through the library. And now that appears to not be the case. So, since we're into time, we'll just wrap it up there. This had a happy ending at my institution. It turned out that the ebook was no longer available. It had been in ebook central, but it was no longer available. And because we don't use auto holdings, that came back to bite us. But we ended up being able to get another ebook copy and make that available. And we resolved it within 24 hours. And the faculty person just, let our students know to just like hold off on the assignment and not to worry about it. So it was all okay, just in case any of you were really, nervous about how that turned out. All right. Well, that is all I have. And I know we need to wrap up. So I will stop talking and turn it back over to Amy if that's needed.